At Kaos and Kaos, our vision is simple, but urgent. A society where truth is pursued with humility, disagreement is met with curiosity, and all communities and minorities can speak, live, and thrive without fear. We envision a public sphere where nuance replaces polarization, and where reason, compassion, and historical understanding shape the conversation that defines our future, especially our future, all of us. And thank you. And by saying we, it's Kaos and Kaos, the Nordic Jewish network. We've been running for 8 years, and in the last 2-3 years, we've been doing these type of events, and we're really happy. It gives us so much meaning to be able to do this. Thank you very much for our amazing guests that have come. Natasha Hausdorff from the UK. Cecilie Hellestveit, that we know from here and there. We have Hanne Skartveit, who's going to roll through the night and not... She's going to be the circus director, I would say. Ervin Kohn, who we have tremendous respect for. And Dag Tuastad, who we also have great respect for. Thank you so much for being here. And of course, Amnesty International.
Bergdis Joelsdottir.
Yes. Where is she? Sorry. It's really amazing that you all could be here. So let's get rolling. What?
You want us to come up?
Yes.
Yes?
No, I want you to stay down there and talk with yourself.
I'm sitting here to have the...
By the way, I didn't finish yet.
You can... Ladies, we can sit here.
1 second. I'm just going to
I
say
don't know,
that
I left
you can
sit
send
down?
messages to your friends
sit next to you.
that this will be live streamed at koosandkaos.org. There's a link from the website to those who couldn't make it tonight. Thank you so much.
Welcome, everyone, to this debate. The term genocide has been around for a while, used by many of Israel's critics, chanted in the streets, taken for granted by some, intensely denied by others. I fear that no one in this panel will be completely happy with me tonight. I maybe even hope so. Because the debate about genocide in Gaza is so emotional, so polarizing, and at the same time, it's also about hard facts, about interpreting international law and conventions. And with a very different view of the whole situation, it's quite hard to find common ground. Before we start, I would like to lay out some guidelines for the debate. I want mutual respect. Everyone should hear the others out. I want no booing from the audience. And I want the participants to remember that they are talking to an audience that are not experts, at least very few, I guess, on international law or the international justice system. So I will also stop you if you get too long. I will ask questions, interrupt on behalf of the audience if you get too technical or too much into the tribal language of international law. So let's start. Cecilie Hellestveit, an expert of international law and armed conflict, could you first just briefly tell us the story of the Genocide Convention, what is required in legal terms to conclude that there is a genocide, and also what is the difference between the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court?
Thank you very much,
Hanne. Just to have an overview of the whole thing.
So thank you very much for having me, and very warm welcome to Natasha, who is the only one from abroad. And I know that discussing these sensitive issues can be different in different countries. Now you are in Norway. I know you came from Denmark. Denmark and Norway are both Scandinavian countries, but I think that in this particular subject, there are differences. So hope that we can have a Norwegian discussion, that you are invited into the Norwegian debate, which is quite different from many of the debates in other European countries.
I'm only sorry we're having it in English. I imagine that's for my benefit.
Yeah, so it is, and to your advantage.
Thank you. Indeed.
Okay, let me just briefly lay out the overall surroundings of genocide. The crime of crimes, as it was labeled by the International Tribunal in Yugoslavia. The Genocide Convention was established following the Second World War and the Holocaust, the genocide and persecution and extermination of Jews in Europe. Now, Raphael Lemkin, he was a Polish Jew. He was a lawyer. He had been examining the Armenian genocide in the 1920s and what was also mass atrocities against the Assyrians in what is today Iraq during the 1930s. So it actually came out of the Middle East, came to Europe, and then in 1943, for the first time, he used the word genocide in a publication concerning the Holocaust. Now, in 1948, the states of the world decided that this should never, ever happen again. The Genocide Convention was sponsored by, among others, Saudi Arabia was the sponsor behind the diplomatic effort to get the Genocide Convention going. The Genocide Convention is a very peculiar treaty among treaties in the world because it does two things. States promise each other that they will always punish perpetrators of genocide, those who commit, those who conspire to commit genocide, those who incite genocide, those who attempt genocide, and those who are complicit in genocide. So it's a very broad prohibition that states undertake to punish. They also undertake to prevent it. Now, this is a very peculiar thing in international law, and one of the few treaties where states actually undertake to prevent something then perpetrated by other states. The Genocide Convention also calls upon the International Court of Justice, the ICJ in The Hague, which is the UN tribunal based in the UN, the Charter of the UN. And if there are disputes among the ratifying states to the Genocide Convention concerning interpretation or application and fulfillment, or if there are accusations that one state is actually responsible for committing violations of the treaty, the ICJ is the correct institution. Very few treaties have this. And that means that all of the states in the world, particularly the powerful ones that have not signed on to the ICJ's compulsory jurisdiction, most small states like Norway, we have done that, but not the greater ones, particularly not the veto powers of the UN Security Council. They are ratifying states to this convention, which means that they are now bound by the ICJ. And this is a very peculiar construct in international law. Okay, what is genocide under the Genocide Convention? It consists of two parts. There are 5 acts, one of which you only have to commit one of them in order for this to be a genocide. So either killing members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So one or some or all of these acts you can commit. Then there is the second dimension, because genocide is not about whether you kill many people. It is not whether you destroy the livelihood of many people. It's about why you do it. So if the state has an intention to destroy a group in whole or in part as such, it can be an ethnic group, it can be different types of identity groups. Racial, religious, national, thank you. But that is the core question. Is there an intent? And this is something that distinguishes genocide from, for instance, war crimes or crimes against humanity. War crimes and crimes against humanity are mass atrocities as well, and they relate to what a state is doing, perpetrating. Genocide is not about that. It is about the policy of a state. So the Genocide Convention basically prohibits a state from having a policy of destruction of a group in whole or in part. And this makes it very difficult to prove. And this is some of the issues that are being discussed when it comes to whether or not we have genocide in various conflicts in the world today. There have been accusations of genocide in Myanmar, in Ukraine, Armenia, and Gaza, and as well in Sudan, which was then declined by the ICJ 2 weeks ago. So, and these are the questions that are being discussed, whether, or the type of things that needs to be proven in order to say that a state or an actor has a policy, an intention of extermination. 2 tribunals in the world have jurisdiction in the international landscape, the ICJ. The ICJ is about state responsibility of the state. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is about individual criminal accountability for genocide. There is no case, as of now, before the ICC concerning any type of genocide in Gaza. That is not under discussion as of now. It is only in the ICJ, and the question is whether Israel, during its campaign in Gaza, is guilty of violating the Genocide Convention. So this is basically the overall question. So I leave it for the rest.
Thank you so much. And many actors have claimed that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And Amnesty International says that the organization can prove that genocide is the right term for what is going on. So I will start to give the floor to Amnesty's international political advisor, Bergdis Joelsdottir.
Thank you, Hanne. First and foremost, I would really like to thank Kaos and Kaos for inviting me and Amnesty to come to this debate. We are very humbled by the invitation, and we are looking forward to an open and nuanced debate. As you said, my name is Bergdis. I'm heading the policy department in Amnesty Norway. My background is from the humanitarian sector, and my academic background is from social sciences. So first of all, I just want to say that Amnesty recognizes what happened the 7th of October 2023. It was horrific attacks by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups, where many people died and where many hundred were abducted and taken hostage. And there are still hostages in Gaza, and we don't know how many of them are still alive. And as Amnesty, we made it clear that in press releases right after, but also in other press releases and in our recent annual report, that we demand that the hostages to be released. So we acknowledge the trauma and share the anger with the Jewish community here in Norway. So then a little bit on Amnesty. We were established in 1961 by the British lawyer Peter Benenson, and his intention was to launch an appeal in Britain with the aim of obtaining an amnesty for prisoners of conscience all over the world. Today we are a world-embracing movement working for the protection of human rights. We are independent of all governments, and we are neutral in our relation to political groups, ideologies, and religious dividing lines. We do not accept funding from governments except for human rights education. So our method is to document human rights violations, to expose the violations, and to confront all governments, states, and armed groups on their human rights obligations, and to seek accountability. We mobilize people around our findings to bring about change, and the aim is to stop human suffering. So in the aftermath of the 7th of October attack, it became clear for Amnesty that we would document both the attack, but also the response from the Israeli military. This is the first time ever Amnesty has launched a report documenting a genocide in an ongoing conflict. And the reason for why we do that is simply because of the necessity of actually doing something preventive to stop human suffering. So during the period of October 2023 to June 24, we have examined Israel's acts in Gaza closely. And in their totality, we have taken into account the acts, the recurrence of the acts, the simultaneous occurrence of the acts, both the immediate impact, their cumulative and mutually reinforcing consequences. And the organization, we have considered the scale and the severity of the casualties and the destruction over time. And the way we did it is we used our range of teams of legal experts, highly skilled, trained in human rights law, trained in international human rights law, humanitarian law, international criminal law. Many of them have doctorates or affiliated with universities. So I just want to underscore that it is highly skilled teamed. The organization, we interviewed 212 people, including Palestinian victims and witnesses, local authorities in Gaza, healthcare workers. We conducted fieldwork, analyzed an extensive range of visual and digital evidence, including satellite imagery. We also analyzed statements by senior Israeli government and military officials and official Israeli bodies. On multiple occasions, we have also shared our findings with the Israeli authorities, but we have not received any substantive response at the time of publication. So just for clarification, the report focuses on the genocide from the point of view of the state responsibility, not individual criminal responsibility. And as Cecilie very clearly talked to us just before, the definition of genocide is that genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethical, racial, or religious group as such. So what we've looked at and document in the report are, we document 3 prohibited acts or 3 criteria under the convention, and that is killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, and deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So we've done this through substantive documentation in a 300-page report. We document that Israel attacks civilians as targets. We have documented that in 50 airstrikes where 334 civilians died, we could not find any military targets involved. We found absolutely no evidence that any of these strikes were directed at a military objective, and we think that is illustrative of a pattern. We see that Israelis systematically use unnecessarily powerful explosives in residential areas, urban areas. And from the beginning, we have seen that Israel systematically hinders humanitarian aid, which is a crime under international humanitarian law. We see destruction, which is very extreme, on livelihoods, access to water, food, hospitals, and cultural and religious sites. And the level of speed and damage we have not seen in any other conflict in the 21st century. We have seen continuous forcible and document forcible displacement of the population. They are moved to so-called zones, and they are being bombed or attacked again and again and again. We have looked at statements from government and military leaders. They are being repeated and also in lower ranks among soldiers in the field with a clearly intent on eradicating Palestinians. We analyzed 102 statements, 22 of them calling for the justification for the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza, and the remaining statements called for other crimes such as settlement expansion, dehumanizing language, racist language, and so forth. And I just want to mention 3 of these statements. The first one is from Yoav Gallant, the former Minister of Defense, in a much publicized televised statement made on 9th of October 2023, where he refers to Palestinians as human animals. Then also Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, who has on multiple occasions stated that this is a war between the children of light and the children of darkness. And then also Israel Katz, the current Minister of Defense, who on 13th of October mentioned that indeed, he said in the Congress, "Indeed, Madam Congresswoman, we have to draw a line. We will not tolerate murdering children and burning families. The line has been crossed. We will fight the terrorist organization Hamas and destroy it. All the civilian population in Gaza is ordered to leave immediately. We will win. They will not receive a drop of water or a single battery until they leave the world." So the way we prove and argue for that it's a genocide happening is that directly through statements and also indirectly through the pattern of conduct from all the previous along all the 3 prohibited acts, from which which is backed by the evidence by the 3 criteria, and based on that we constitute that it's a genocide. So what Amnesty states is that actually military acts and genocide are not mutually exclusive. You can have an objective of genocide also in war. And I just want to remind us all of why we are here today. I think I'm not just only interested to discuss genocide, what are the technicalities of a genocide, but the fact that we have to actually stop the human suffering. And that is also the reason for why these laws and these conventions were invented, to reduce civilian and human suffering. And I really want to acknowledge, and I hope that I also have all of you with me that we can agree on the inherent right to life. Thank you.
So, Natasha Hausdorff, Director of Lawyers of UK Lawyers of Israel. You do not at all agree with Amnesty International, as everyone here knows. Why not?
Well, thank you. I'm very grateful for the invitation, and it's a pleasure to be back in Oslo. Thank you also for the introduction to the Nordic culture. It is an element that I am familiar with, indeed, also the differences between Denmark and Norway. And I think it's important in both locations to speak the truth about what so many organizations that clearly have a hallowed status, which was for so many years rightly enjoyed because of the good work that they had been doing in upholding international law and human rights, but to call those organizations to account when they go so badly off of the rails. And I'm not going to take this opportunity to go through chapter and verse of all of the falsehoods in the report that Amnesty International published on genocide. In fact, I did that in Copenhagen to a certain extent, and the videos are not online for those of you who are interested. But what I would propose to do is take what has just been said as the structure to hang my response on it and provide for you an overview, a lens, if you will, to understand why it is that this activity is so very damaging, and why it is that you will hear people saying, well, Amnesty International says so, Human Rights Watch says so, Save the Children say so, the United Nations says so, soon even the ICJ and the ICC say so. That does not make it true, ladies and gentlemen. And the fact that all of these organizations are involved in perpetuating these falsehoods is no accident. It is so important that we understand the symbiotic relationship that all of these organizations have one to another, and the cyclical process of justifying disinformation with appeals to authority. It is clear from this report that has been presented to you, from the methodology section, what information has been relied upon. Hamas, we heard it referred to as the local authorities in Gaza. Hamas has provided the information upon which these conclusions have been drawn. That, in and of itself, should give pause for thought. But when the information that Hamas provides is repeated by once hallowed, even sacred, NGOs and international organizations, is then given a stamp of approval by UN special rapporteurs, is included in UN resolutions in the UN Human Rights Council or the General Assembly, and then is in turn also relied upon by international legal tribunals like the ICJ and the ICC, whose findings in due course will no doubt also be relied upon by the very NGOs that started this process of misinformation in the first place, I think one starts to understand where this cycle of disinformation originates. And the reason it is so important that we are having this discussion, and so important that we are having this discussion in a part of the world where these organizations enjoy such hallowed status, is because of the repercussions of this disinformation campaign. I don't mean the blood on the streets, I don't just mean the blood on the streets of DC only last week, when Sarah and Yaron, workers at the Israeli embassy, were gunned down, executed in the capital of the free world. Absolutely, that is a consequence of this misinformation that is being spread. But I'm also talking about the Palestinian civilians, those vulnerable in Gaza that are suffering as a result of the perpetuation of this conflict. Because every time this misinformation is spread by Amnesty International and others, Hamas takes succor. Hamas prolongs this conflict. This is a war that could end today. Hamas has it within its power. It need only return the hostages, 58 of them, and we wear this pin to remember them. 58, some alive, some dead, over a year and a half in terror dungeons in Gaza, having been brutalized by this organization. They could end this today by returning the hostages and laying down their arms. And every time these malicious false allegations are leveled at Israel, peace is pushed further away, Palestinian civilians continue to suffer, and that is the direct responsibility of those organizations that spread this misinformation. We heard about the Genocide Convention, the importance of punishment and prevention. That is critical, because it speaks to the obligation that every state party to that convention has to support Israel in its endeavor to punish and prevent genocide, those acts of genocide that occurred on the 7th of October. It is truly extraordinary, even deplorable, that Amnesty International and others cannot bring themselves to recognize real genocide while seeking to point out an imagined one. Because when asked about those attacks, which are clearly orchestrated with genocidal intent, and were celebrated as part of that genocidal intent, and were threatened over and over again, those acts of barbarism, we heard them described in the context of, well, this, many people died. No, ladies and gentlemen, that passive description does not do justice to the medieval barbarism, the rape, slaughter, mutilation, torture, and abduction of innocent civilians by a genocidal terrorist organization that these organizations refuse to call out for their genocidal intent. Those double standards would be deplorable enough. But we have more. We have misrepresentations of the statements that are sought to be relied upon to establish a genocidal intent supposedly on behalf of Israel. 3 of them were referenced here by Yoav Gallant, Benjamin Netanyahu, and Israel Katz. In each of the instances, the two members of the war cabinet, when this report was written, Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, that statement is misrepresented, both by Amnesty International in the report and also by South Africa in its application to the ICJ, because they were talking about Hamas. And if you include the full quote, that much is clear. But it's not just the leaving out of quotes, which is a problem here. It is the supposed evidence that is relied upon in this report. And I quote, "We could not find any military targets involved in the 15 instances that were purported to be investigated." Investigated how? I might hear you ask, given that Amnesty repeatedly says it has no representatives on the ground. Those investigations, let's be clear, going back to the methodology of this report, authorities in Gaza. There's also a reference to a PFLP affiliate, the Union of Agricultural Works Committees, a prescribed organization, ladies and gentlemen. This is the evidence that is relied upon. And the reason that any international lawyer worth their salt ought to be calling this disinformation out is because one cannot make any credible assessment of strikes, let alone on Hamas misinformation, without the intelligence that indicated where to strike, how to strike, with what to strike, and in what manner to strike. That is information that the Israelis have shared with trusted partners, notably the UK and the US. And their assessment has been clear over the last year and a half, that they have no concerns about breaches of IHL in respect of targeting and proportionality. And when I say IHL, I'm talking about international humanitarian law, the law of armed conflict. We could not find any military targets involved. Remarkable, one might think. And then there was this also reference to unnecessarily powerful explosives. Well, in circumstances where Israel goes beyond the rules of international armed conflict, beyond the requirements, where the precision, the targeting, the proportionality analysis is unprecedented in the history of armed conflict, and when the precautions that Israel takes are likewise unprecedented, that is a remarkable conclusion to draw. And let's be clear about what Amnesty says about the precautions that Israel takes. These efforts to evacuate civilians that reasonable people ought to praise. Am I right? Amnesty doesn't. They accuse Israel of ethnic cleansing or of forced displacement, are the words used in this report, for seeking to get civilians out of the way. And this is strongly indicative of what it is that we see here, through this cyclical process of reinforcing the Hamas agenda. Moving civilians out of the way is against Hamas interests. They wish to hang on to their human shields. Accusing Israel of genocide falsely, propagating this ancient blood libel against the Jews. It used to be killing Christian children to use their blood. It's now occupation, ethnic cleansing, colonialism, apartheid, and genocide. This serves Hamas's purpose. It prolongs the conflict, and crucially, it increases international pressure on Israel to cease its lawful self-defense so that Hamas can survive, can live to see another day, can continue to wage its war of terror and its genocidal intent against the people of Israel, and can continue to subject the Palestinian people of Gaza to untold horror, subjection, torture, execution. All of this is documented. Even in the last year and a half in Gaza, none of this appears in the report. This is the true tragedy, and the responsibility that individuals and organizations like Amnesty have in propagating this conflict is undeniable. The responsibility for the continued death, undeniably, of civilians in the Gaza Strip is not just the responsibility of Hamas, but the responsibility of those organizations that support Hamas in this endeavor. And that is why it needs to be called out, along with the weaponization of international law more broadly. And that is why it is so important that you are all here today to hear the truth. Thank you.
So, Cecilie Hellestveit, one of our leading experts in international law and law of warfare. What is your opinion on all this? Who is right, who is wrong?
Well, I am not to judge that, luckily.
I know.
Now, I think, first of all, I think the overall question that everyone is struggling with is whether what is happening in Gaza is war, and what goes with war, meaning IHL violations which happen in war, perhaps crimes against humanity, perhaps from both sides, or whether it crosses into what can be labeled genocide. I have been working with IHL for 2 decades. And let me just share a couple of reflections before I return to what Natasha and Bergdis talked about. Now, genocide, the concept is being used in 3 ways. It's being used by victims of mass atrocities. Every single war that I have worked with, be it Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and so forth, where there are mass atrocities being committed, the victims will call this a genocide, because that is the name that they can use to call the unnameable. And that is not the legal dimension we're talking about here. It is what people call their own nightmares and their own tragic history. Now, that type of use of the word is common, and I can never be a person who comes into a conflict saying you are not allowed to use that word about your own suffering. The second way we use genocide is when states declare something to be a genocide, like the US did in 2021 on what the Chinese were doing in the camps in Xinjiang against the Uyghurs, like the US did in January about what the Rapid Support Forces are doing against the Masalites in Sudan. Now, this is a statement of policy. It is not about legal proof. It's about saying this is something that we consider to be genocide. Therefore, we will fight this with the means at our disposal, not military means, but other means, in order to prevent it and to remove those forces from that area so that they cannot continue to do this. It's a political use of the word genocide. What we are talking about is the legal concept, basically. And I just want to say one thing as an observer in Norway. First of all, the attack on Israel on the 7th of October. I've been involved with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for 3 decades, on the ground, in institutions, as a part of the peace process and so forth, working with both sides. Now, my first reaction when I saw that, it was, this is a recreation, it's a symbolic recreation of the Holocaust by Hamas on Israeli sovereign soil. This is how this is being perceived by the victims. So you this has genocidal dimensions for Israel and for Jews. And that dimension, I think, is being totally, or to a large extent, under-communicated. Now, this is the one thing. But that means that there is a ghost that is being re-erected full-time. Secondly, the Palestinians, they have been told for a long time that the Jews were victims of a genocide in Europe, and they needed protection. Therefore, they needed a state to protect themselves against potential future genocides. Now the Palestinians are victims of a genocide. Hence, they also will need a state to protect themselves from genocide in the future. And I think that this political dimension is very present in the Middle East. I don't think it's visible from where we sit in Europe, but I think this is a very, very strong, powerful dimension, driving also the arguments about genocide by both parties. I'm not a part of this conflict. However, when it comes to the question about whether what Israel is doing in Gaza is actually genocide, I very much agree with Natasha. I think that some of the arguments being presented in order to suggest that this is genocide, when you pick ministers not even responsible for waging the war, when you pick speeches that are being given to soldiers being sent off to war, you cannot cherry-pick these things in order to make your case. This is not what genocide is all about. The question is there a policy? And when Amnesty and other organizations, international lawyers, and states argue that you can have a military objective and it can still be genocidal intent, because this is basically the argument.
Two things at once.
Two things at once. But this is only when there is a policy objective stated.
The only reasonable inference.
There was in 2014 a genocide was committed in the Middle East. It was the Islamic State against the Yazidis. And this was a campaign where the Yazidis had a stated policy of extermination of the Yazidis. This was what they were arguing. They were producing this in policy documents, and then they went on to do it. And of course, they had a military objective with capturing Sinjar in the mountains. There was a military objective, but it was also a genocidal intent at the same time. This was reflected in the policy. Now, the question before the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, is whether, if you don't have a policy, there is no statement by the state. In fact, there is a reason that is self-defense. There is a lawful objective with the military operation. Can you then say that the way the state is conducting its military operations will show intent to commit genocide? So this is just the question, if there is no declared policy. Now, the year after the ISIS genocide in Syria and Iraq, mostly in Iraq, the ICJ had a genocide case. And it decided that you can have an intent to commit genocide under the convention without having a policy. Because the states were saying, no state in the world today will have a policy of extermination. It doesn't happen. So that means that you will never be able to prove that a state is engaging in genocide. And then the states started to discuss. And this discussion is still ongoing. The discussion, in fact, is on the table of the ICJ in the Myanmar case, where the Myanmar was brought before the judges in 2019 and 20 with accusations by Ghana, an African state, on G, that what the Myanmar military was perpetrating against the Rohingya Muslim minority was, in fact, genocide. Now, they did not have a stated policy, and the question was whether the way they were conducting military operations, that you could infer from that genocidal intent. And when you look at some of those reports, and now I come back to Natasha's point about the cyclical relationship between the different actors. Now, the different NGOs, the civil society organizations, the different institutions inside of the UN organization, there are many, some with a lot of authority, some with much, much less authority. It depends on where you are in the ecosystem and how this is kind of driving the argument of genocide. And in this, I very much agree with Natasha. I think that the way that, particularly the Albanese report, the anatomy of a genocide.
What is that, the Albanese report?
Albanese report was a report written by the Francesca Albanese. She is an Italian international lawyer. She works with refugee law. And refugee law, I also teach refugee law, is an international law where you really, really emphasize the protection of the individual, because refugees are very, very vulnerable people. Now, when you go into a war with that perspective, you will find things that me, as a cynical IHL lawyer, will not see.
Well, America's also just requested her removal from this position because of her outrageous positions.
But the point is, she made this report. This was the first report she had. She's an independent international expert, and she is there because she is an expert.
1 minute.
And she has been given the mandate to write reports on the human rights of the Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territories since 1967, including Gaza and the West Bank. So this is her first report, came out in March in 2024, and it was called The Anatomy of a Genocide. Now, when I read that report, I can see a person who really takes the perspective of the Palestinians. I also believe that she is inferring from what she sees in the military campaigns and the results of the military campaigns in Gaza, something that she will define as genocidal intent. And when she introduces this into the UN system, of course, then a lot of actors will first and foremost say an international lawyer has now called this a genocide. And therefore, I think that has its own dimension into the system. Yeah. Now, and here I disagree with Natasha. I think some of the civil society organizations, such as Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International, they have as their mandate to take the perspective of the defenseless, the vulnerable, the ones without rights. And if we were ever to be in a war in this country, we are going to be so glad that there are some organizations like that outside somewhere in the world. It doesn't necessarily have to be the correct interpretation, but it is the interpretation that takes the human-oriented approach. Now, the problem in this situation is that that happens in a situation where you are dealing with the Jewish people. And they are, that is not any people when it comes to genocide. And it produces a lot of commotion. I think in addition to the Palestinians, you also have a lot of other actors that then happily grasp that vocabulary and uses it. And I think this is also one of the reasons why it has become extremely toxic for anyone to talk about it. I believe, just finally, I think that what has happened in the last couple of months, particularly with the last military operation by the Israeli government that was put into place on the 18th of May, the Chariot of Gideon, that is a military operation that has a stated objective that is different from the military operations that we've had so far. And I think that that is potentially going to change the evaluation of the policy of Israel and what it is aiming to do in Gaza. And I also think that that also, from a legal perspective, will change the evaluation of the instruments that Israel is using in Gaza.
May I just clarify?
First Amnesty.
If I can clarify one point briefly, because it might narrow the area of disagreement, because I fear you may have misunderstood me.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, it's going to be a discussion, right?
Yeah.
I'm not using the term blood libel. You say in the context of the Jewish state it becomes difficult. I'm not using the term blood libel simply because this is an accusation being made against the Jewish state. I'm using it because it is a false accusation, as is demonstrable from all of the evidence that goes in completely the opposite direction, which, if it had been considered by the report, which we've heard again this evening, Israel was accused of hindering humanitarian aid. One only needs to look at the COGAT website to understand how much volume of aid has gone in excess of the needs of the Palestinian civilian population. The fact that this has been discounted, and this is another blood libel, this libel of starvation, it is the false nature of these accusations that are being levelled at the Jewish state that make them the modern blood libel, not just simply the fact that it's the Jewish state.
Then it's Bergdis from Amnesty.
Yeah, thanks. There are so many things I have to comment on. First of all, I can confirm that we have people on the ground. So the information is actually, it comes from our own employees on the ground. We're one of the few human rights organizations that have people on the ground. And their sources from Hamas. Yes, the sources are also from Hamas. In all conflicts, we would talk to everybody. And not necessarily all warring parties, but also all the others. That's how basic research happens. So that's kind of unnecessarily to actually underline. In terms of when you say that, how can we conclude that there were no military targets when we don't have insight into the intelligence of the analysis that the Israeli military does? Obviously, we don't have access to that, and nobody gets access to that. And it's very few that if Israel really wanted to prove that there actually was a military target, why just disclose that? We have asked, but there was no response. And also, if you say that you cannot discuss whether it was a military target, whether it's within the international humanitarian law or international law or not, it means that you can actually not comment on anything because you don't have access to the intelligence. And that's not how it works. Definitely not. You have also governments and states that actually condemn attacks that are deliberately in breach of international law. Then, in terms of us supporting Hamas, I strongly distance myself and my organization from that accusation. We do documentation of human rights violations all over the world. We do it on all sides of conflict. This week we have had reports on Georgia, on Argentine. We have a press release on the US tomorrow. In terms of resources and number of man hours, we have published a series of reports also on Iran. We know that governments and that state leaders don't like our criticism. We are this undesired entity in Russia. So we are not doing this to make friends. That's not our business. Our business is to disclose human rights violations and take the side of humanity, to actually uphold the right of life, no matter where you live or how you look. And that is the core of the point here, that I'm very sorry to say, but Israel has crossed the line of what is acceptable and what is possible to do within the rules of war. And by breaching it again and again and again, you are watering out the rules that binds us together as a world. The UN Charter, the promise that countries made in terms of actually agreeing on some basic rules. So it's not about double standards, it's about universal standards that apply to each and every country. And that is what we expect from Israel, it's what we expect from all armed groups as well, and it's also what we expect from all other countries. It's not specific for Israel.
Ervin Kohn, you are...
Sorry, can I just...
Sorry.
I'm sorry, but there are...
Sorry.
But there are a number of things... There's something... There is a matter that I need to correct for the record. We just heard...
Later on, I have to be able to run this show. I'm sorry.
We just heard something that was on...
She's the boss.
No, sorry. Ervin Kohn.
We'll come back to it.
You are one of the former leaders of the Jewish community in Norway. You have, again, criticism for saying that Amnesty's use of the word genocide is anti-Semitic. What do you mean by that?
I think what Natasha wanted to comment is that Amnesty have feet on the ground. They don't anymore.
They say in their report that they don't. I can quote it to you.
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
Because Amnesty's Israeli chapter went against Amnesty International sitting in London when they accused Israel of apartheid in their 22 report. And then again, when they refuted the claims of genocide in the December 24 report, and then they were sat on the bench for 2 years. So they're actually cut off from Amnesty. So Amnesty actually has a democratic deficit. But my main concern is Norway, and of course the Jewish minority, and what happens to the Norwegian society. And Israel has never been about foreign policy in Norway, nor in other Western countries. It has been internal policy. Like, you have no parties in Norway campaigning without having a view on Israel or on the Middle East. Now this has turned into being identity politics. And that is a problem. When all the proof I have for that is that when all influencers who normally just are interested in hairs, nails, and makeup have to have an opinion on the Middle East, then that is a proof that Israel has become identity politics. The problem we see today is, first of all, rising anti-Semitism. We have the numbers. But on the other hand, it's very worrisome that we can experience a larger tolerance for anti-Semitism. Not only anti-Semitism itself is rising, but the tolerance for anti-Semitism is rising. So what are the drivers? And that is all the lies, all the turning upside down of facts and realities, like, for instance, comparing Russia to Israel. You should compare Israel to Ukraine. Both were attacked, both are defending themselves. So this is the way we communicate. Then your question. Genocide is the most horrific of crimes. Internationally, we have 4 internationally recognized genocides. The first one on the Armenians, 1915. We have the Holocaust in 1945. Then we have Rwanda in 1994. And then Srebrenica in 1995. Norway hasn't even recognized the genocide on the Armenians. So genocide is not a word that we float easily. What has this got to do with anti-Semitism in Norway? We have the figures, and the figures from the surveys that the Center of Holocaust Studies show is that there is a correlation between views on Israel, hatred for Israel, and your views towards Jews. And that's a terrible correlation because when you feed Israel hatred, this has a direct consequence on anti-Semitism in Norway. So calling Israel's war of defense genocidal is feeding the hatred. So you're making Israel the villain and of the worst sort. So I have to admit I haven't read the report of December 2024, but I appreciate that their Israel chapter, Amnesty in Israel, they said that this report does not reflect the truth, it's biased, and then they were cut off for it. It's enough for me. Anyway, it's not neither judicially or factually a genocide.
And Ervin, anti-Semitism in Norway. Some people say that the Jews always draw the so-called anti-Semitic card. Which
That's gaslighting. That's
yes,
not true.
I agree. So my next question is, where do you draw the line between legitimate criticism of Israel?
It's very easy. 2 things: demonizing Israel and comparing them to the Nazis. Yeah. That's it.
Is that the line you can agree with? Or does you ever run a danger of making the criticism of Israel to turn anti-Semitic?
I just want to comment first on the Israeli chapter of Amnesty, and they were the reason for why they were suspended from Amnesty is because of numerous warnings of racism against Palestinians, and also the chair.
From the employed in Amnesty?
Yeah, from employers.
Your people on the ground?
From within, in the secretariat. Because it's a mix, you know. And it is not because of the disagreement of the report that it's not because of that. And also you can read the resignation of the chair of Amnesty. He wrote an op-ed. So that is available for everybody to read. This is also being handled by the International Secretariat. So I don't have further details on that, on the specificities of the research which is being done, but definitely there is an open possibility for it to be reopened. But that is the reason for why there is a suspension. Then on anti-Semitism, I think, you know, and I do acknowledge, I know, and we see that with all minorities in Norway, and we've done, I must say that Amnesty Norway, we've done several reports, particularly on online hatred or online hate speech, where we are measured through sweeping the internet for thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of comments, and where we see that hate speech increases when the level of conflict arises. This doesn't only apply in the Israeli-Palestinian case, but it applies for all minorities. You can see it with the Samis when the Fosen case came up. We can see it also on Pride, when there are discussions around Pride issues. And we did a research last year where we analyzed like hundreds of thousands of comments in Facebook, and we can definitely see that the level of anti-Semitic quotes increases when the level of conflict increases, and that's not acceptable. And that is something that we are also keen to work to continue our work on. We don't, and I feel it as a mother, as a sister, when I know that there needs to be police protection in the Jewish kindergarten. It's not acceptable at all. So this is something that we really have to work on in Norway as well. But still, we have to also be able to continue and fulfill our mandate, and to be able to criticize the Israeli government for their actions. So we need to continue to distinguish that, and we need to still also work and to ensure that all Jews in Norway feel that they are safe and can live a normal life like all the rest of us.
That's like opening open doors. I mean, no one says that you shouldn't criticize Israel. No one criticizes Israel more than the Israelis themselves or the rest of the world. It's not about criticizing Israel. It's about the way you do it. That's feeding the hatred.
Natasha?
Okay, there's also another very simple answer as to when criticism of Israel is unacceptable: when it's untrue, when it is based on a lie, as this report repeatedly cites. Now, I do have to pick up on this. We have people on the ground, because it's remarkable that the Amnesty International representative here doesn't know her own report. Without access, Amnesty International had to rely on trusted field workers based in Gaza to identify or locate survivors, victims, and other witnesses among the Palestinian population in Gaza. Well, in addition to the local authorities that they engaged with, the trusted field workers are, of course, also controlled by Hamas, because Hamas controls Gaza. It is extraordinary also that this is an organization which wishes to mete out criticism, but cannot accept criticism when it comes its way. The timing of Israel Amnesty being suspended is remarkably problematic for this organization if it's being maintained that it had nothing to do with this utterly false report. And I think that bears further looking into, given some of the comments that I remember circulating in the press at the time. And it wouldn't be surprising to me if Israel Amnesty called out this report for its lies, because of the manner in which it completely ignores material in the public domain. We heard response to the criticism? Well, we could have asked the Israelis, but they didn't want to share sensitive material with us. Well, perhaps I can't blame them, given how twisted everything else has been in this report, that Israel wouldn't be sharing sensitive military information about Hamas targets with an organization that is set out to demonize and delegitimize the state of Israel, the Jewish state. But there is publicly available information on the COGAT website. I'm looking at it now. It tells me the total level of aid that has gone into the Gaza Strip: 1,790,878 tons of humanitarian assistance facilitated by Israel into Gaza. This report does not take into account that publicly available information. It does not take into account the academic analysis by nutritionists over the course of the last year that determined between January and July 2024, looking at the calorific content of that produce, a total of over 3,000 calories per day per individual went into the Gaza Strip. That is not even cited in this report or in others. I don't want Amnesty to get all the heat here. I already indicated how they're not alone in driving this misinformation campaign. But what is significant is what we have seen lately. In the last couple of days, a new mechanism for delivering aid into the Gaza Strip, supported by the Israeli Defense Forces with American contractors, to set up 4 centers so far to distribute aid to Palestinians directly so that it cannot be diverted by Hamas. This new aid system is calling the bluff of those organizations that keep crying famine, and it demonstrates in the reaction we have seen to it, and I'd be eager to know Amnesty's position on this. We've seen the UN disparaging the system before it's even begun, trying to undermine it before it has a chance to prove its purpose and improve the lives of ordinary Palestinians in the Strip. The system proves not only the UN and other international humanitarian organizations' incompetence in the Gaza Strip in seeking to distribute this aid without Hamas diverting it, but it also highlights the complicity of these international organizations in propping up the Hamas war machine in order to continue its terror funding, because this is how Hamas has been funding its war effort against Israel, by stealing that aid, by selling it on the black market at higher prices. And it is since the blockade was instituted, and let's be clear about the context of this blockade once and for all, ladies and gentlemen, because over 25,000 trucks were facilitated into the Gaza Strip by Israel over the hostage release period, over the deal period, 25,000 trucks plus 5 to 6 months worth of aid. That was 2.5 months ago. People are crying starvation in Gaza. Where has the aid gone? Why is Amnesty International and others not asking these particular questions? The reality, forgive me, can I just finish this point? The reality is, and it's laid bare now in the last couple of days, that they are so afraid of the world seeing through this new aid delivery system that they are complicit in propping up the Hamas war machine, not just through the propaganda that we have seen in these reports, the blood libels, the misinformation, and the obscene allegation of genocide. And it is obscene, especially when all of the evidence goes in the other direction. And the importance of the aid that has gone in is significant, because you do not feed people if you are trying to commit a genocide against them. All of that is being ignored, and the blood libels continue to prop up the Hamas war machine.
Okay, a bit shorter, all debates. We also have an expert on Palestinian politics here, Dag Tuastad. Is the debate about the genocide and the legal things, is that also going on in the Palestinian groups in the Palestinian politics, or is it mainly in the outside world? The legal terms and all those things.
I think in Palestinian politics there is a feeling of being sort of abandoned, and there's a feeling of sort of injustice, and like it or not, the people think it's hypocrisy to be loyal to Ukraine and not to the Palestinians. So there's a questioning of the role of the international law in Palestinian politics when it comes to Gaza. But just also want to say about the debate, if I may. I think also there is a matter here of genocidal thinking, and that need to be addressed, because like one of the colleagues I have cooperated with in the recent Research Council project is the Jewish American Israeli sociologist called Tamir Sorek. He's quite a brilliant sociologist, and he just made a survey in Gaza. And one of the questions he asked was from the book of Joshua, when the ancient Israelis killed all inhabitants when they invaded Jericho, including children and elders. Then he asked, do you think when Israel conquers an enemy city that they should do the same? And 47% answered yes. And 82% of Jewish Israelis support expelling Palestinians from Gaza. And I think the thinking of some segments in Israel is something that also needs to be addressed in the discussion of genocide. Two more things, if I may. Because I just was this semester in an Arab forum in Qatar initially, where I learned a little bit about perceptions on Palestine there, and yeah, there is problems there, I can tell you. And then I was in Israel for a month, and visited also, I tried to visit various Jewish Israeli communities, and including those on the right, Likud people that defend Netanyahu, etc. But of course, I see I see that people are very occupied and opposed to the war because of the hostages. And then I also see that when some people that oppose, that support Netanyahu, when I ask them, they say that, you know, that like the children in Gaza are indoctrinated, so they will become Hamas. And then I ask, but what do you mean by that? Well, do you think they are legitimate targets? And people, no, it's not. But it's like hesitation. And that's very problematic, of course, to learn about. But that said, that's those who support the government. There is, of course, I get to know in Gaza as in Israel, very large part of the population that are victims of their governments. And that's, in a way, there are two similarities here between Israel and Gaza. And the first thing is this, that the Gazans, when they voted for something else. You can say that there was, in 2006, that people voted for change and reform because they didn't vote for the Qassam brigades, and they didn't vote for 7th of October. And then you see that there are demonstrations. People call Hamas out, and they are shot at. So the Gazans are also now victims of Hamas. And of course, I would also say that Israeli Jews and Arabs are victims of the most right-wing government in history. And in a way that has hijacked Israel in a way that is devastating for the future of Israel. And so in a way there is a similarity of victims on both sides when it comes to a government they do not want. And then there's another similarity I want to say. There is also this idea, something about denial, because in Qatar, you hear there are, I think, a problem in Palestinian politics that some people initially sort of celebrated the terrible massacre. That this was an opportunity for the Palestinian cause. I mean, it's possible to rationalize it, but of course that was a terrible thing to know about Palestinian way of thinking, that some people sort of thought that this was an opportunity. And then you had a new development that was denial. Hamas didn't do all this, and has been exaggerated, and all this, and that also spread in the Palestinian society and in other places, like in Arab world, that this has been exaggerated. Now I think also in the Palestinian community, this is no longer the case. The people in Gaza are. We also see spread of in social media of Palestinians. When you see Qassam, you shouldn't take the hostages. You shouldn't have hostages. Like the Palestinians spread them as a criticism of Hamas in Gaza at risk. So there is internally also an empathy for the hostages in Gaza, believe it or not. And then I think about denial. I think also, like I said, in Israel there is this issue about denial, and I have to be honest. I think you are an expression of this, and because there are people killed. There are a lot of children killed.
I've never denied that.
May I please? You have spoken very much. Can I speak without you
never said
interrupting
that's
me?
not the case.
Okay, but and then I think there are a lot of and then there is this. They call it like this Hollywood conspiracy that because of other journalists can't get into Israel, you have like to Gaza. You have to rely on the Hamas authorities, and then you cannot. Then you get the social media, so it's fabricated. I believe it's not fabricated. I have a colleague that we managed, Scholars Rich, get out, talk to Gaza every day, and he have family. He have people who are killed, and so we know it's not fabricated. And so there is, so I think there is this idea of denial also in part of the Jewish Israeli community that there are not that many victims. This is not true, etc. And of course, in a way, as I read in Haaretz today, it's in a way understandable, because when people are in denial, it means that they don't approve, they don't justify what is actually alleged reality. So if you say to the Palestinians, but Hamas did all these murders, and they say, no, we didn't, but this is the reality, you have to accept it. In a way, it's way like what you call cognitive dissonance. It's the way the mind works. And also for the Israeli Jews, it's not that many civilians killed. We didn't see that. It's Hamas propaganda. But then if you say that this is reality and people are exposed to it, that's a way to sort of have maybe a change of this terrible situation. And now I think because I thought I would never have the word, I just use it when I have it. That's the sort of hope that there are actually now also movement in Israel with very brave people going around and showing pictures of civilians in Gaza, because they think that the media has not been up to what they should do in Gaza.
First, Cecilie.
Sorry, you will allow me to answer the very serious allegation that's been leveled at me?
Yes, but we have to...
Well, can I do it now? Because it has just been...
I have also a lot of serious allegations being leveled at me.
And you had opportunities to address them.
You too.
But you address... You complain about human rights organization, everybody being so... But they don't have an opportunity to defend themselves.
Let's take the heat out of this for a moment and step back.
30 seconds, and then it's...
And look at, well, the difficulty... We say in Hebrew, one fool throws a stone into a well, 10 wise men can't get it out. Sometimes it takes a bit longer to explain and unpack. We've just witnessed a very interesting phenomenon occur on this stage through two, I'm sure, very reasonable, highly educated, extremely intelligent individuals that just went through exactly the same set of motions. They both sided us. Earlier, we had an indication that there were war crimes, crimes against humanity, perhaps on both sides. That's the reasonable position to take, isn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Here, we've just had quite a more egregious suggestion that there is, in fact, both sides and some equivalence in terms of the atrocities and the denial of those atrocities, comparisons between the only democracy in the Middle East and an internationally prescribed genocidal terrorist organization. This lies at the heart of exactly the problem that we need to get to the bottom of, and you have seen it demonstrated in this debate. The reason that there is this cognitive dissidence, as you describe, is because of the disconnect between this both sidesism and the reality. And I invite you to read further into this and educate yourself to understand what is true and what is not true. And look up Pallywood. I join you to draw your own conclusions on this.
Okay, that was that was your 1 minute, because now it's Amnesty's turn to answer.
So on the humanitarian situation, I think it's highly problematic that Israel denies access, because if Gaza was open for journalists, for researchers, for humanitarian agencies, the truth would have come out. So yes, it's war, but there are war in a lot of places, and journalists have been there. They've been in Afghanistan. Agencies are in Afghanistan. They're in all kind of dangerous places in the world. And I just want to say one thing. Weaponizing humanitarian aid, having the defense to deliver humanitarian aid, it breaches totally with the humanitarian principles. And you know, when the International Red Cross is not the ones to deliver aid, but only the military, then something is really
Hamas
wrong.
To divert the aid.
So, but the screening that is going on and the way it's been commercialized, it is really dangerous. We're on a slippery slope, and we will regret it when it's our turn to receive humanitarian aid.
Cecilie?
Now, I have a reflection, and it goes back to the issue of information. There's a lot of disagreement on the stage about the accuracy of information and whether you should rely on information coming out from the various actors. Now, I want to remind everyone on stage and in the audience that this is a war, and this is not the occupation versus resistance kind of low-simmering armed conflict that has been going on between Israel and the Palestinians since 1967 or 1987 with the eruption of the First Intifada. This is fully fledged war. By both sides, it is perceived as existential. Now, this is the point of departure. For both sides, it is perceived to be existential. Knowing the armed conflict, when I hear one or another say, if only Hamas did this, or if only Israel did that, the war will end tomorrow. No, it wouldn't. It is a much more ingrained, complex situation than that. Now, when it comes back to the information sphere, I want to remind you that in a war, information domain is one of the domains of war. You are perfectly allowed to lie about your enemy committing war crimes. You are perfectly allowed to do that. It is a ruse of war. It is allowed. Which means that in this particular war, we should be very careful about how we rely and absorb the information coming from both sides, particularly in Europe, because we are very far away. We have our own monsters. Some of them are related to what is going on. Most of them are not. And they are awakened by this information war, not because it is intended, but this is how we absorb the information. And this is how this results in a situation where young Jewish children in Norway need protection. It is horrendous. It is, in my view, a collapse, a moral collapse in the receiving community that is not able to handle the combination of war, freedom of information, freedom of speech, and a very simplistic understanding of the wars going on in the Middle East. This is basically a conflict that has, frankly, very little to do with the dramatic existential war actually being fought by Israel and the Palestinians in the Middle East. This is point number one. Point number two, taking this back to the question of genocide. Because this is where I see a very important key to understanding why genocide has been brought up so vividly, so quickly. Why? Because if you want to talk about war crimes being committed during conduct of hostilities in Gaza, in this war, you need to have access to information, a lot of information. Some have, yes, I agree with Natasha, a couple of allied of Israel, they have access. What have they done on occasions? They have put in moratoriums. They have put a stop on the delivery of certain...
But they've also consistently said there are no concerns about breaches of IHL on proportionality and targeting, which is what we are discussing for the most part.
Exactly. But that is not something that the general public will understand.
But it's something that completely contradicts Amnesty International's report.
But the point is, because when you are confronted then with people like myself saying, oh, are you saying that these are systematic war crimes because of disproportionate collateral damage, or because you are directly targeting civilians, because these are war crimes? And I say, we cannot know this at the present point. Okay, what does Amnesty do? Well, what can we do then to fulfill our humanitarian mandate? Okay, crimes against humanity, same problem. Are these actually civilians or are they military targets? When were they, these things? So by saying that this is difficult to have reliable information to conclude, then you will say, okay, what can we focus on? We can focus on genocide. Why? Because we don't have to prove what is going on the ground. We can only look at the intention.
Can I ask?
I think it's a valid point to point out that the number of when we look at do we have to kill like 20,000 kids? Are they competents? Those like.
Oh, maybe it's 14. Sorry, no. I remember it's 14,000 babies in 48 hours.
I think
outrageous
we have to discuss that as well.
But genocide
to look at the numbers
is not about.
May I ask a question?
Quantity.
No, it's not about quantity, but also I want to mention that there is no hierarchy between the crimes, international crimes.
Yes, but
and it's
not effects-based.
So our intention is prevention. It is to actually preserve life and to try and definitely the hostages should be released. We have demanded. It's a crime. It's a war crime. It's definitely a war crime. But one crime doesn't defend another. And that is the point. And I think we are, we have to look at, what type of humanity do we want to preserve in the world? And we need to go into ourselves, each and every one of us. What are we doing to contribute to more humanity in the world today? It is not happening in Gaza right now. And that is the real problem. This must stop. It has to stop. And what are we doing to make it stop?
So I'm quite disappointed that the thousands of children numbers have started to be thrown around again, because we've seen the devastating impact of the 14,000 children in 48 hours lie that it had when only a couple of days later Jews were murdered in the street of DC. The fact of the matter is that Tom Fletcher repeated that lie on the back of an inaccurate IPC famine review report. And every single one of these reports, and I invite you to look at the UK Lawyers for Israel review, to see the detail of the inaccuracies, the implausible conclusions that were drawn on the basis of only partial information, that were in fact reviewed by the Famine Review Committee and found to be based on an entire absence of evidence. Those are also the reports that are being propagated by the likes of Amnesty International. And this false information costs lives. But it's not just the information and the facts that have been falsified, but also international law. Amnesty International is actually pretty honest about its efforts here. At page 101 of the report, seeking to rewrite the law on genocide because it doesn't fit the crime that Amnesty International imagines. the ICJ case law, which Celia was already beginning to describe, that it must be the only reasonable inference. And one of the reasons for that is because of the chaos that exists in armed conflict. Yes, kids die. I have never denied that, but what I do is apportion the responsibility for that appropriately, and that is at Hamas, and it is now also on those who have supported the Hamas agenda, who have propagated their false narratives and who are encouraging them to continue with this conflict, including some of the organizations represented here. The important question that I asked has been answered. Amnesty International objects to the delivery of aid to Palestinian civilians in a manner which prevents diversion from Hamas. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Evidence of their agenda.
Okay.
And this has to be called out, and it has to have a stop put to it, because it cannot be covered up with these polite words of wanting to end the suffering and wanting to uphold international law. It does the exact opposite of that.
Okay. Now it's been almost 2 hours. We're going to end with just a final 2 minutes each, starting with Ervin, and then we take it this way. You can take 1 minute as well, but no more than 2.
Yeah, I have a problem with everyone, not only Amnesty, who vilifies Israel and feeds the hate of Israel. And like the representative of Amnesty said, this is the first time they accuse anyone, any government, of committing genocide. And we have a lot of examples where larger number of people, for instance, Yemen, 400,000 people died or were killed, and 75% of them were kids under the age of 5. We never heard anything of genocidal intent or nothing like that. So it's the first time, and it's especially evil to label Israel the Jewish state of genocide. I don't have to explain why.
Dag Tuastad, you're next.
Well, I think it was quite bizarre scene when the Israel ambassador at the UN tore apart the UN Charter. Because, as you know, the first paragraph in the Charter is all humans, beings, are born free and of equal dignity and rights. And I think a lot of those people who are, like Amnesty, and she criticized the aid agencies, UN, etc., they work for this principle. And I think it's like indignified to cast allegations against them that their activity is not based in sincerity and actually an attempt to upkeep this principle. But I'm not sure that what you are saying is doing that. UNRWA has been on the ground in Gaza, and there have been some people that was with Hamas there, but I don't think that can say that all of UNRWA is a Hamas branch. That's like saying that if there is a pedophile policeman in a police station, all the police is. It's logic that is not. But they are actually the ones who have saved a lot of people that have escaped in Gaza, and they know how to distribute aid, and to target them. I find immoral.
And helt annen debatt.
Let's not open the UNRWA debate. That we're going to leave here. Natasha, your last final words tonight.
Okay, 3 points. Firstly, in relation to the false information that we've heard repeated, and these photographs of dying children, starving children supposedly, these are to a point very sick children that have been manipulated as part of Hamas imagery and propaganda that is seemingly eaten up, next to all of them, it seems, very well-fed mothers. Work that one out, ladies and gentlemen. But the fact of the matter is that we have on the one hand this claim of Palestinians dying of hunger, and on the other hand, Palestinians being told not to collect food, first by Hamas, and now it seems by international organizations as well that object to this particular process. Point number 2 is in relation to the mandate that Amnesty... Actually, no, point number 2, let's just deal with this because it's super important. False casualty figures. Hamas casualty figures lie. They have shown to be fabricated. They're being relied upon by some of the people on this panel. That is part and parcel of supporting Hamas propaganda. We know that they include people that the Hamas themselves have shot, people that have been killed as a result of Palestinian Islamic Jihad Hamas rockets falling short in the Gaza Strip. Anyone propagating these numbers, including people on this stage, if they are, is seeking to do Hamas's bidding for it. And finally, point number 3. The Amnesty International rep said that she does not have access to intelligence. But she says they have a mandate, so they assess. And they conclude on the basis of that assessment that there are breaches of international humanitarian law. Ladies and gentlemen, this is critical. They cannot assess international humanitarian law without that intelligence because it is intention-based, not effects-based. And it is the assessment is on the basis of the intelligence that is available to the commander who makes the decision. Anyone who knows anything about international humanitarian law knows that. So either they don't understand the basics of IHL, or they know they cannot make an assessment, but they make one anyway and fuel the blood libel. I hope we'll hear which one it is.
Cecilie?
Now, finally, I just want to remind everyone that there is an ecosystem of international institutions in international law. Amnesty International belongs in that ecosystem, not as the actor that proposes the law as it is, but an actor that proposes the law as Amnesty International would like it to be. It's a progressive, perhaps very often too progressive interpretation of international law. I mostly object to their interpretation of international law. You know that. Now, I do not object to the fact that they do perform that function. So when they are writing in the beginning of this report that we insist that you can show intent by inferring from how you conduct your war. This is the way that Amnesty International is playing into the discussion that is going on among states. And among those states, I can promise you that there are a lot of states that are not progressive at all. And this is something that makes Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, and even Francesca Albanese, let's not go into details, even she has a function in this system. It doesn't mean that international law is about to collapse. Yes. It doesn't mean that we should deconstruct our institutions because, states disagree. No, this is what international society looks like. But to point the finger of genocide immediately because there is a war going on, I strongly advise against it. I warn against it. Because I think genocide should still be preserved for those, and here I disagree, again, with Amnesty. I do think that there's a hierarchy between the international crimes, and I think that we are well advised to keep genocide as the crime of crimes, when everyone must work and act together because there can be no other option. Thank you.
And finally,
So I just want to say that Amnesty, we will continue our work in terms of documenting human rights violations, no matter where they happen and who commits them. And we will make the perpetrators accountable, and we will mobilize. I am very, very happy to also see that the Norwegian government is on the progressive side on international humanitarian law and wants to uphold and preserve humanity in the world, because that is where. Please, we are having a decent conversation, guys. Okay. So, we will definitely continue with that. I don't agree with what has been said here. There is no false information as such as here. It's been verified and documented. Our findings have also been supported by more and more, both international human rights law experts, but also states. We will see how the court case in ICJ goes. However, calling it genocide or not, what the conclusion that the ICJ will reach will not help all of those who died the 7th of October, and those who are dying in Gaza now.
So, this debate tonight has been very hard, very confrontational, but I believe that I have everyone in this room with me when I say that I hope from the deep of my heart that this war will end, the hostages will get home, and somewhere in the future there will be a solution that gives both the Israelis and the Palestinians the freedom, the prosperity, and the security they all deserve. So, on that note, thank you for coming.